Right, we are live, and I can see some of you guys already joined, so we will be just waiting a little bit longer. But while we are waiting, I just wanted to make sure that everything is fine and working correctly. So please let us know in the chat if you can see us. Emily is here, by the way.
Hi guys.
And if you can see us and you can hear us, and whether the quality is okay. We are very excited to be doing this stream because of the topic as well is really cool, but also because we haven't done live streams for quite a long time.
No.
We've done some for Patreons, our patrons. We've done some exclusive live streams, but we haven't had the chance to do these big live streams for everyone, the public ones. So it's really exciting, and I can see already there's quite a lot of you joining in, which is great. Feel free to use the chat. Let us know whenever you have questions. Emily is helping, and also Shumi is helping. She couldn't fit her in the room.
There's not enough space.
Yeah, so she's also watching, and she will be helping to respond to any questions you have. This stream, the way it's going to work is mainly will be a technical demonstration. So it's all about Illustrator.
Yep.
And we will be going through a full illustration process, following the same brief that we gave you last week. And that brief was actually you guys responded, and we've seen some really cool designs that you submitted. So we will be actually going through those entries as well, and we will be also choosing 3 winners.
Yeah, that's exciting.
And so that will be around the end. So if you submitted a design, make sure you stay till the end. And also, if you haven't done that, it's still cool to see what others done, following the same brief that I'm going to go through. So I think without any further delay, I would like to just get started talking a little bit about why is it the best to work in Illustrator when we are creating characters like these monsters. So what's the difference between Illustrator, Workflow, and Photoshop? And the example I prepared for today, I actually done in both applications, just to be able to show what's the difference and why I would use one over the other. So most important thing is that the whole session is recorded, so you will have the full thing available later on. So if you miss anything, or if you join later, don't worry, because you will be able to watch it again. And so that shouldn't be an issue. You don't need to ask me to repeat things, because you will be able to watch it again. And even during the live session, you can actually scroll back and forth in the video. So if you want to just go back quickly, you might be missing some things, but you can still go back even during the live stream, which is quite cool. I've done it on other live streams when I was watching them. All right. So one last thing is that in the chat, we actually have super chat option available. So you probably see the little money icon, the $sign next to the smiley face in the chat area. This is actually something that you can use in case you have an important question that you would like us to include in this stream. So you can decide how much you want to donate for our channel. If you don't have a question, you can still use this feature just to support us. So obviously this is completely free, and we are just doing for educating everyone. But if you have some spare money, you can donate to us, and that will help us to do more of these live streams. But it's completely optional, so don't worry about it. You can use the normal chat, and we will try to respond to as many as possible of the questions.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So let's get started. Let's not delay it any further. You've seen us. Now let's see the computer, and let's see Illustrator. So I'm just going to switch my camera onto the smaller version. Okay. So we have this example open in Illustrator, and this is actually a stock graphic which we use for our live stream. And the reason I have this up here is because I wanted to start off with this really cool example showing how a vector graphic can work, and how you can create a character with fully vector graphics. Oh, we already have a super chat. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. From Dennis. But yeah, so we can see that the vector outlines being created to produce this artwork. And whenever you are in Illustrator, all you have to do is to just simply press Command Y or Control Y. With that, you can switch to outline mode. And in outline mode, you can very quickly see how many objects were used to produce an artwork. So that's what we can see here as well. And every detail, when you work in Illustrator, it means that every detail is resolution independent. So you can zoom in as much as you want and you won't be losing quality at all. That's the biggest advantage of working in Illustrator. Now, the disadvantage of working in Illustrator is that you have to work with these very solid, sharp outlines most of the times. Of course, there's ways around it, which I'm going to show today. But it is quite hard, or you have to work quite hard to produce photorealistic results. If that's what you want to do, it will be hard to do in vector graphics. So usually, working in Illustrator is better for doing more stylized illustration. So like this one we can see here, so more like cartoon style illustrations work better. While if we switch to Photoshop, I have the example that we will be working on today. So this strange little monster is the one that I'm planning to recreate in Illustrator, but this one is currently in Photoshop. So when you work in Photoshop, you have different ways of producing your artwork. So you work more like a traditional medium where you use like brushes and paint or draw. So here's my original sketch as well. And so that was the original concept that I came up with, to have this very simplified shape, just like more like a big grape or something like that.
I think grape, yeah.
Yeah, and then just put the features on it and make it look like a little dinosaur. The reason I chose a simple one because it's easier to explain the techniques on this, but even this will take some time to produce and recreate in Illustrator. So just to see how it's going to look like, I will be doing it from scratch, but here's an example roughly how it's going to look in Illustrator. So you can tell the difference is that here we can still do shading and we can still have nice smooth transitions between colors, but you will have to rely on different methods using gradients, gradient maps, and all kinds of like tricks with masking. So it's a little bit more complex than in Photoshop, where you can do the shading by simply just drawing with different colors and use opacity while drawing to create the shading. So this is really the main difference between the two applications. But as I said, if you work in Illustrator like most professional illustrators would, that means that your work, the artwork that you produce, can be printed in any size without losing quality. So that's why for print especially it's very important, because you want your graphics to be scalable to any size and always maintain the original quality. But also it is important for screen, because nowadays we need to work with all kinds of different screen sizes. So we can have like retina displays or high definition displays or 4K TVs. And again, even for screens, you might need to have scalable graphics. So both for print and web and screens in general, it's great to work in Illustrator to produce your artwork. Okay, so now that we talked about the introduction, let's get started with the project itself. So for those who submitted their work, I mentioned in the beginning, but whoever is joining later, I just wanted to mention again that we will be reviewing the work that was submitted at the end. So following the same brief, we've got some really cool examples that we will go through at the end. All right. So is there anything, or shall we get started?
No, I think
it's all good.
Yeah.
Perfect. Cool. So, all right. Now, the way I would normally start whenever I work in Illustrator is obviously create a new document. So let's just get started with that. I'm going to set the bleed to 0. In this case, we don't need to worry about that. And I'm going to use a landscape format. So I'm just going to click create. So there's our blank screen. This is always the most intimidating part. And that is why I actually like to work off usually from sketches. Now, if I just bring in a sketch, I'm a little bit more free to do whatever I want from that point on in terms of colors. But sometimes I actually produce a colored version in either Procreate or Photoshop, like the one I just showed you before, and actually place this into Illustrator, and I'm going to trace over that result. So I just show you, if I have the just a sketch, that is already enough to get started, so I can use this to trace over. But in this case, I am going to use the full version of the artwork. So let me just place this in here into Illustrator. There is a shortcut, Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P to get to the place option, but you can go through the file menu as well. And then all you have to do is to find the image on your computer. So this is that PSD file, it's a Photoshop document. So I'm just going to place this into the document that I have open. Click and drag to define how big you want it to be. There you go, a little bit make it bigger maybe in this case, something like that. And then here comes the first tip. It's best to turn your layer into a template. If you double click on the layer on which you place the graphic, actually you can rename it as well, but double clicking it will give you the option to name it, and I'm just going to call it reference, and then there's the option called template. Once you turn that on, it will automatically dim the image, which helps to trace over it. It's almost like putting a tracing paper over your illustration, but it also locks it automatically, which makes it much easier to work. So once you click OK, now it's much easier to work because I won't accidentally make changes to this background image reference. But what you need to do, and don't forget to do that, is to create a separate layer on which you will be doing your illustration. It's always good to name your layers because that way you can keep an eye on what is happening. So just to show you, if I now start drawing, it's going to appear on that layer. And I actually like to keep my illustration layer open. So whenever I create a new object, I'm just using the ellipse tool now, but you can see it's already popping up in the layers panel. So I can see how each object is being created live. So what we need here, first of all, is to start with probably the biggest shape. And there's a reason why I created this monster in a way that it almost looks like a big ball, because these round shapes, in general, whenever you use round shapes, they can be more relatable. So most characters created from round shapes are very cute and cuddly most of the times, while if you use more like triangular shapes and sharp edges, that usually means that it's a bit more like aggressive, or it can feel a bit more intimidating. But the reason why I chose this round shape is because I wanted to make this character look cute, but at the same time also slightly scary. That's why I made the eyes the way it is, and also the teeth. So it is like a mixture of those two. So what I'm going to do is to use the ellipse tool and simply start drawing. Now, here's another power tip. Hold down the Shift key while drawing any shape to be able to reposition your shape while still drawing it. So especially with the ellipse tool, it's always tricky to find out where to start drawing it, right? But what I always do is I start drawing it and then hold down the space bar to reposition, then let the space bar go and continue drawing, then hold down the space bar again and do this toggle back and forth until you get as close as possible to the shape that you need. So once you have your shape as close as possible, you can, of course, refine it. So you don't have to work with the perfect circle or ellipse that it creates. You can refine it by using the anchor points. Now, first of all, of course, we have to still be able to see what we are doing. So I would press forward / or the question mark on the keyboard, which will remove the fill color in case the fill color is on top. The way you can tell that is by checking your swatches panel, for example, or the toolbar on the left. When you press X on the keyboard, you can very quickly toggle between the stroke and the fill color. So you want your fill color to be on top. You can do that by pressing X, as I said, and then press the forward / or question mark to remove that color. So I only want to see the shape, which it's enough to see the stroke. I don't need to have a fill color there. And once I can see the shape, I can select the anchor points. So an ellipse is always created from 4 anchor points. And what you can do is to use the direct selection tool, the white arrow tool, and select a point. If you see all points being red or being the same color, that means they are all selected. It's best to click away and then click again on one point to make sure that you don't have all of them selected. But once you select a point, you can individually move it around. So I'm just showing it to you that this point can be squeezed around and move wherever I want it. And that really helps because all I want is to have a little bit more unique shape than just a standard circle. So I'm going to drag this point down a little bit here, and of course I can use the anchor points as well to move these details around and push them and nudge them around. So let me just select that point as well there. I'm going to move it down a bit, and maybe this one as well, something like so. Maybe this one can come in as well. If you use the arrow keys on the keyboard, you can also nudge details very gently. So move anchor points around. Shift arrow keys can move things faster as well. But I'm fairly happy with the way this turned out, this shape. Of course, you don't have to always exactly recreate the original design. You can alter it slightly, so you can always go off a little bit from the original design. So I'm not going to restrict myself too much. It's just a reference anyway. So once I have the shape in place, I actually like to put the most important shapes in the illustration straight away without first starting coloring things. And the most important details in this case would be the limbs and the tail. So let's just draw these. Now for this, I am going to use the pen tool, and the pen tool is one of the most important tools to learn if you want to get good at Illustrator. So I'm going to start drawing with this. If you're not familiar with this tool, I recommend to watch the videos on our channel. We have plenty of videos on this tool in particular, but also we have the Illustrator Masterclass in which I go in great detail about it. So if you want to check our courses, you find this on our channel, and also there's a link in the description. But I'm just going to show how I would draw with this tool and tell you if I use any shortcuts, I will mention it. So you click and drag whenever you want to create curved lines. I'm just going to zoom a bit closer in this first one so you can just see what I'm doing. I'm going to click here and notice how I immediately overlap it with the original shape. That's important later, that will be important, so just wanted to point that out. Click and dragging, I'm creating the curve. And by the way, here again, just like with shapes, if you hold down the space bar, you can drag your anchor point around even while you're drawing it. So click and drag and spacebar to reposition the anchor point, and then drag further to align your curve. Now, whenever you use the curve, you get the handles as well, and you don't want to cross your handles over the details that you are going to continue drawing on. That's one of the rules. You want to align it to the edge, so it has to be tangent to the details that you're drawing, like this. So once again, not like that, not like that. You want it to be tangent, so aligned to the shape. The way I usually explain this is you want to click and drag in the direction the shape is going. And once again, I use spacebar to reposition my anchor point if I feel like it should be a bit further down. And also notice that I'm ignoring small details like the claws or the fingers or whatever that is. How would you call this?
I think claws. I think
claws, yeah,
claws,
yeah. So I'm avoiding that because I'm concentrating on one shape at a time. So Illustrator is working with objects. And this is actually something that's definitely worth mentioning. So when you work in Photoshop, you work on layers. So everything is produced on layers, but it's relying on you to create those layers. While in Illustrator, whenever you work, every single object is automatically acting like a separate entity, almost like a layer. We call them sublayers. But that's why whenever you draw, you have to think of creating objects individually. And then these objects can build up, so you can build one element and you can draw behind and in front. So you don't really have to worry about meeting the edges of these objects. So you will see how I'm going to overlap them. So let's move on. I'm going to continue drawing this line here. So let's draw this, and notice the way I'm drawing is trying to have a nice fluid and smooth result here. Just going to go that way, and here's the important detail. So as I said, once I overlap the detail, I am not concerned at all about what's behind the body, because we will only see what's outside here once we add the colors. So you only have to worry about that detail. And the same thing here in the back, especially with this other leg. If I start drawing that one, and by the way, if you ever feel like you don't see exactly what you need to draw, so your reference is not visible clearly, you can double click on the layer and just increase the dim image, or reduce it, sorry, no, actually increase, so not 30, in this case maybe 80%, so I can just have a look at it, and yeah, I can see now better what I need to draw. So using the pen tool again, I'm just going to do the same thing and go through this detail here, nicely follow along, and once again I will overlap the shape and then just close it off. Here behind the body, it doesn't matter at all what's happening. Now if there is a shape like the leg in the front, or this part, for this it will actually matter how you draw it, because it needs to come in front. So here we will need to pay attention how we close off the shape. But even here there is a trick which I'm going to show you that helps to make this work, so that we don't really have to worry about the top edge too much. So I'm just going to draw something like that, and then you'll see exactly what I'm going to do here on the top. All right, so we have the little shapes here at the bottom ready. Then I move on to the tail. Once again, behind the body, no need to worry about anything. Just nicely go through the details like so.
We have a question on the chat about how to join different outlines into one part. Are we going to move on to look at that in a minute? I think is what's the plan. Yeah,
yes.
Just checking.
Yes. So you can use Pathfinder or Shape Builder to join shapes together or subtract them from each other. We will be using that feature, but to be honest, for these details we won't need to do that. So we don't need to create one big silhouette, because it's better to keep these elements independent from each other. You will see why. For the shading part it will be important. So some details are better to be kept apart, not joined together, but whenever you want to join details together, I'm just going to draw two circles here on the side. If these two I need to join, I would select them both, and that's important, and then Shift M is the shortcut, Shift M for the Shape Builder tool. You just simply draw over the details that you want to combine, or you can hold down the Alt or Option key to subtract. So any overlapping shapes can be subtracted or joined together very quickly. We will be using this feature soon, but not for these main details that we have here. So let's move on to drawing the eyes, just so I know where they will be. Using the ellipse tool and using the space bar, I'm just going to draw the first one there, and then draw the next one there, and I will also draw in the iris, so just I can see where it is. There you go. So we have those details in place, and then we can come back to the mouth and also the additional details later. But for now, we have the most important or most crucial elements already in place. So now it's time to start adding colors. So what I would normally do is to start with the biggest shape once again. Let's select that. And then this is where the gradient panel comes into play. Now, the gradient panel will have a couple of default options there. You can pick any of these while having the object selected. Just make sure that the fill color is highlighted, so not the stroke, the fill color. And then select one of the gradients. It doesn't matter which one. And you can switch to your stroke and remove it, set it to none, because from this point on we don't need the stroke at all. You can of course keep your outlines if you want, but in this instance, with this illustration style, I'm going to just work with fill colors. So what we have here is now a gradient applied on this shape. but I am going to change the gradient type. So what I will do is, having the fill color selected, I can see the gradient. First of all, I will remove all of these different shades because I only want to use 2 shades of colors. And I'm going to set it to radial gradient, which helps to create the impression of a round object. Once you have that, I'm still not worried about the actual colors. We can change that anytime. It's more important to get the position of this gradient right. And the way you do that is by pressing G on the keyboard. That gives you the gradient tool. When now you see this thing called gradient annotator. You can also get to this from the view menu. If you have the gradient tool selected and you don't see this, just go to view and show gradient annotator. Once that's visible, you can drag the center point of it to reposition it, and you can very quickly get to a result which already starts to look 3D, because you have to think about the light source. You choose a light source in your head, and I chose it from the top left. So that will hit the object from the top left, which means it will be always that area which will be in light. So again, for example, like the tail will be more like in shade because the light is coming from the left, and the shadow, the cast shadow, will be also more cast onto the right. You can see my original drawing as well. The shadow is going a bit further to the right. So you just keep in mind that. But it's up to you. You can choose your light source to be on the right. You can even have multiple light sources if you want, but that usually complicates things. I am going to place my light source somewhere around here on the left, and then dragging this other point, you can increase the spread of the light source so it grows a little bit. We have a more like even transition on the object. So we would call normally this the highlight, the top point. Then we call this here the halftone, and at the bottom we would normally have the shadows, which we will create separately. I'm not going to use the gradient for that. I will use a separate technique. So let's just change the colors quickly. I'm going to pick a color like a purple color here, and then another shade of purple, but that needs to be darker, something like that. That looks similar to the original, but we can turn it off, turn it back on. Yeah, it looks all right. As I said, we can always change this later. So for now, I'm happy with the way this looks. So let's select the other shapes, like this one here in the background. And the cool thing is that if you press I on the keyboard, that's the eyedropper tool, with that you can just click on your previous shape to very quickly sample the same colors. Now notice that when I've done that, because I started drawing the big round shape first and then I drew the legs, the leg is looking like it's in front of the body, and that's not good. We need that leg to be behind. So you use the arrange option either from the layers panel and dragging that object down, and you see immediately looks better that it went behind, or while that object is selected, you can use Control or Command square brackets to move things up and down. That's what I would normally use. So now it's nicely set in the back, but once again, use your gradient tool and don't forget where your light source is. So align it, again, thinking about where the light is coming. So it's coming from the top left, so that's where it will be lit, and every other detail will be more in the shade. So we can use the gradient and increase it a bit, maybe something like that. And by the way, your gradient can be also altered in terms of the shape. It doesn't have to be always round, even when it's set to radial. You can use that black point and you can squeeze it, turn it into more like an elliptical shape, and then it can even be rotated by clicking around it and then rotate it. So that actually fits much better.
That's really cool.
Looks more like the shape that we need. Let's use the same gradient for this object here. So I use the eyedropper, click on the previous one, and notice that whenever you use the eyedropper, by default, it's going to pick the color, in this case that gradient swatch, but it doesn't remember the customization that we've done. So the rotated and tilted radial gradient, because the eyedropper by default doesn't capture every detail. But if you want, you can double click on the eyedropper tool and then turn on the appearance for eyedropper picks up attribute. So if you turn that on, now I click on the previous detail and see the gradient now is exactly the same as the other object. So it even picked up all the custom changes that I've done there. That's not something I would keep on always for the eyedropper tool. It can get in the way sometimes, but in this case it was very useful because I didn't have to recreate it again. Now, because I'm using this gradient, it already feels like we have the lag nicely blending into the other object because it's exactly the same gradient. But of course, depending on how the gradient is set up, if I move it further up, then it's going to feel like there is a sharp edge there, or we can keep it soft like this. So it's quite cool when we work with gradients that, again, you have so much possibilities there how you use it. I can see one question that came up about the mesh tool. We will be using it, but I am combining usually the mesh with simple gradients. So you get better results sometimes for bigger shapes to use an actual gradient directly on the object and then use a mesh on top of it as a separate object. So you will see my shadows on the belly of this monster will be created with the mesh tool. And yes, the video will be all available online on our channel later on. Not only that, but we will also have the full final Illustrator file available to download. So we will include that in the description in the video. So once you see the recorded version, just come back and download the file if you want to check out and see how we've done it.
Yeah.
So it will be a good reference for you guys, hopefully. Okay, so moving on, next little lag in the background and sample again. And I think that looks already fine. Maybe we can just move this gradient up a bit. Okay, looking good. Let's select the tail, again sample, and let's use our shortcut to send to back. What's the shortcut to send to back?
I have to be able to look at the keyboard. It's shift.
Yeah, you can hold down shift as well, very good point. So command square bracket would be send one step back. And we can see it in the layers, it's going up and down, command square bracket, so control square brackets on PC. But if, as Emily said, if we hold down shift as well, it would go all the way to the bottom or all the way to the top. So command shift square bracket. Let's send it all the way to the back and then use the gradient tool and align it once again. I'm just going to rotate it a bit. And in this case, again, keep in mind that this is on the top. I mean, that's the brightest detail because that's where the light source is coming from. Okay, so already we start to feel like it's a 3D shape and it's looking more like realistic as a real object would be. So not flat colors. And this is simply just using one single gradient with two swatches on it. So you don't have to be really overcomplicating things. It's more about how you use these features. So you can get to an amazing result relying on just simple gradients like this. But of course, once we start using the gradient mesh, we can take it to a whole next level. So we will be covering that in a second. All right. So let's just do quickly the other shapes as well. And I am going to show you a little bit of theory as well soon, just in terms of how you can create cool characters, because I don't want to just talk about the technical bit, because that's great. I mean, you can get really good at Illustrator, that's one thing, but obviously within the creative process, normally I would say that around 10% in terms of what's important to produce an amazing artwork, it's only 10% of knowing the techniques and being able to use shortcuts and all that in Illustrator, but it's actually 90% the importance of the full workflow is relying on the original sketch. So coming up with a unique character and unique idea, that's like the most crucial thing. And that's also as well something that you need to practice and learn, but I am going to give you some tips on that, and if you guys are interested in that in general, like drawing and sketching and how to create unique characters, that's a huge topic, and we can do so many live streams on that as well in the future. So just let us know, and also let us know what else you are interested to learn in the future. We can cover so many things, from illustration to graphic design to retouching. Luckily we know all of these things, and we use them all the time for our professional work. Cool. So let's move back to our design, and quickly let me add these shapes. So I'm going to, in this case, I'm going to press Command Y or Control Y to have a visibility of the shapes. So this is really cool, and I use this all the time. So even if you already have your colors, in this case we have all these gradients in place, you can still see your original reference very quickly by just pressing Command Y or Control Y. So we are in outline mode, and then we can start drawing again. Now let me zoom a little bit closer here, and by the way, let's not forget to save your work. It would be a good place to save it before it gets lost. So I'm just going to save it as Monster Live and save. So I am going to use the pen tool again, and I'm going to draw this shape. Let's just draw it like so. So once again, notice how I am, actually we can already draw it following the edges of this shape here. Again, notice how I am not too worried about the original shape. I'm just trying to roughly get this right, and this is where the shape builder will come into play. So we have our shape in place, but to get that little edge there, I am going to start drawing another line. Holding down spacebar, I can move this in place. Move this in place. By the way, if you hold down the Control key, you can also very quickly get back to your previous points if you need to adjust them while still drawing with the pen tool. So Control or Command key for previous anchor points, and the active anchor point you move with the spacebar. These two keys are probably most important when you work with the pen tool. So I have this nice shape here created, but notice how I went beyond the edges. So if I switch back to seeing these, I can select them and press D on the keyboard, so just you can see it better, and I can remove the fill colors with the forward slash or question mark. So what I would do at this point is to remove the strokes as well. So I'm just going to hide the strokes, everything is set to none, and then use the shape builder tool, and holding down the Alt key, you can Alt or Option key, you can click on those details that you don't need. So that's why I went further, because then I can just chop off the things that I don't need. So it's like trimming off the excess detail. And while still having this selected, I press K on the keyboard to get to the Paint Bucket tool, with which we will access the Live Paint feature. And at this point, you can just select two colors. Using the arrow keys on the keyboard, you can toggle through quickly the colors, and just click on these two sides very quickly. So Live Paint can very quickly detect the edges and automatically fill in those details in colors, even though this didn't start off as two separate objects, but Live Paint can detect that. But what you need to do is, you don't want to get stuck in Live Paint, you want to expand this. So here on the top, you just click on Expand, and then also ungroup object, ungroup, or Command Shift G or Control Shift G. So once you do that, then now you have two completely separate objects. So once again, let me just run through this, and then we are going to do the detailing on it. By the way, if there is a shape that looks very similar, you don't actually need to recreate it. You can just duplicate it, Alt, click and drag, and then just resize and rotate until it gets in the right shape. Only do this if you don't need to change the perspective. So I mean, this shape here should change a bit. I would select these points here and just drag them up a little bit, maybe drag that point in. I'm using the direct selection tool for this, and I think that looks fine. Let's see. Okay, so you can see, like, you don't have to redraw everything, but this one is quite different in the perspective, so it bends slightly differently, so it's better to draw it again. So let's draw this one more time. So I'm going to draw this silhouette first. Just very quickly draw the silhouette, and then we will draw that line into it. I hope the quality of the live stream is good enough, the video quality and the sound and all the setup that we are using. We spent quite a lot of time in improving this. We wanted to, it wasn't bad last time we've done it a few months ago, but I wanted to make it better. So hopefully everything works better now and you guys enjoying watching it. So let's just carry on and draw this detail here. Okay, so once again, select both, use the shape builder, delete what we don't need. This actually ended up being a full closed shape. I didn't want to close it up, so that's what happens if I don't pay attention. So yeah, we have the two shapes ready, and it's easier if I just switch back here. So no fill, no stroke. Use the shape builder tool, Alt or Option click to cut off the excess. Then use the paint bucket tool, fill in the colors, then expand, ungroup, and that's done as well. Once more, these two shapes I think we can use quickly to duplicate onto here. And I'm going to use the outline mode so I can just see what I'm doing. So there we have this next detail. Emily, how would you call these details? It's like the dinosaurs had these. They are not. I can't remember. There's a term for it.
Is there? I don't know. I actually don't know what.
I have good questions, right?
Yeah, you do. Always catching me off guard.
If anyone knows how is this called, I think the Stegosaurus had these. I can't remember the name. But yeah, if there's anyone who's good at the dinosaurs, it will probably be able to help us out. Let's see if we find the term. By the way, here at this point, I just show quickly another tool. I'm using the warp tool for quickly warping these details and just simply squeezing them up in that direction. To be honest, it's just going to mess up the edge, so it's actually fine the way it was. Don't worry about the warp. It's not a bad tool. I use it sometimes, but in this case, it's just going to be better like this. Maybe I can just adjust that anchor point there on the top a bit. Okay, there we go. And then again, just duplicate this one more time and just copy it down here. Rotate with the rotate tool and align and resize. Maybe distort a bit, like so, and then rotate a bit more, and then just align it with the anchor points slightly. Now it doesn't have to be perfect again. Okay, so we have these details in place, but of course, once again, these should go behind. So let me select these two shapes, send to the back. Okay, so that's already what we needed. But once again, the colors should be a little bit better than that. So what I'm going to do is to select one of these, sample the object itself, which has already the gradient on it, but I want to use different colors here. So what you can do is double click on the gradient color stops, and you can pick a different color. I'm going to use something like an orange color on both sides. So just a darker orange and something like that. Orange looks quite dark. I don't want to make it too dark. That's quite good. And then maybe this one can be a bit brighter. And then we can set the gradient here to linear. And then use the gradient tool and just align it like that. So once again, the brightest spot should be on the top edge, and then it should get darker as it goes down. Once again, because the light is coming from the top. So in this case, because it's like a plane, the way the light will react to it is more similar to that instead of a round radial gradient. I can see an interesting question about hair spikes and fur. There is a technique for that. If I have time today, I will show it. If not, I will show it in another live stream. There's a really cool technique. It's quite a unique way of doing it. I've used it for a couple of different designs in the past, and it works quite well. But yeah, so what I'm going to do here, because this monster doesn't have fur, I can't really demonstrate it on this creature. If we have time, I will show you at the end, or I will show you in another stream. But you see what I've done, I just selected all the other details that should look similar, eyedropper tool, click on the detail that already has the gradient, and boom, it did it for us very quickly. So now let's move on to quickly create the additional details here, like the eyes. Now for the eyes, I am going to pick again the background color, but then I'm going to change it to something brighter, and actually we can set it to white, but then make it slightly darker, maybe add a little bit a tint of purple in it, something like that. It can be a bit brighter than that. And then I'm going to alt click and drag to duplicate that gradient. Stop, I'm working here in the gradient panel. Drag the purple out that we don't need, and then make this detail darker. And if you need to reverse your gradient, you can click on this icon here. So reverse gradient. Yeah, that's looking more like an eyeball. And then we can select that. Use that and apply it on this other shape here, and then select the two details here and press Shift X to quickly swap the stroke to become the fill. Shift X is a great way to very quickly change the two main attributes of colors that you are using. Now what I like to do also normally is to have a bit of like a depth around the eye by adding an additional shape. I'm just going to send this right behind the eye, but not set it to black. I'm just going to use purple like this. I am going to, it doesn't have to be a gradient. We can just apply a color on it, but make it darker. So something like that. Maybe it looks a bit too dark. Let me just brighten it up a bit. Something like that. That looks all right. So I'm going to duplicate this, paste it here on the other side. And there we go. So it already adds a little bit of depth, but here comes the most important lesson once again from this tutorial. Look at the original reference. I can show this also in Photoshop just so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So see, the way the eye socket works is that normally you have like depth that you need to show. So we have eyebrows, and then the skull normally like has quite a big area that's coming out, and also under the eyes as well is usually coming out, and then the eye sockets are going in. Now, even though it is a monster, you still want to relate to creatures that we are familiar with, and you want to make it believable. So the way you do that is by studying a bit of anatomy and then apply that to your creature designs. So to get this eye socket design working, we need to show that depth in Illustrator. So when I am moving back into Illustrator, first of all, I'm going to draw that shape in the background. So using the pen tool, I'm just going to draw around it. Something like that. And then close it off there on the top. I can refine these shapes later if I want to. Again, let's draw this other one. And I'm using the pen tool, but you could do this with other tools as well. Let's just go around it here.
When you're finished with that, we have a question from Graphically Deb asking, when you duplicate, is there a way to stop shapes being grouped together?
When I do what?
She's asked, when you duplicate like that, is there a way to stop those shapes from being grouped together?
Yeah, so most of the time, if you don't already have a group, it shouldn't be grouped together automatically. They should be drawn as separate objects. But the best thing to do is to keep an eye on your layers panel, and you can see like every object in my case is a separate object, so nothing is grouped together. If you are in isolation mode, for example, your objects might end up being drawn inside a group. So just make sure you are not in isolation mode, and just check your layers panel. Normally, your drawing should always be on top of the previous objects and not inside a group. There's actually 3 drawing modes in Illustrator: draw normally, which is placing on top, draw behind, or draw inside. So as long as you're not in draw inside mode, it should work. All right, cool. So hopefully that answers the question. And I know you, Deb. She's I think you are on Patreon, and I think you are also on the courses as well. Yeah. So it's great to have you here, and it would be cool to find out if there's anyone else here from our patrons or anyone who's already studying from our courses as well. Just let us know in the chat if there's anyone else here. We will probably recognize you anyway. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do here is to switch back to the normal mode. And first of all, it looks quite scary because we now covered up the eyes. But once we select these, use the control square bracket or command square bracket to send it back until it goes where we need it. Now, those two circles we need to place on top of this. So I'm just going to select those. Actually, they are there. It's just because it's the same color, it looks like it's lost. But what I'm going to do now is to use the eyedropper tool and click on the body once more. And once I have that, I can refine this gradient. And once again, what you need to think about is the shape. Maybe I can make this one of these colors a bit darker, something like that. But the shape is the key here. So see, already by just doing that, it looks already better. But if I select that gradient, I can maybe move it a bit further down. And then I am thinking again that if the eye socket is hidden from the light source, then this top area here should be in shade, but whatever is coming more out should be starting to get in the light. So now if I check this, looks already much more realistic, right? And let's do the same here. If I select the same gradient, again, we can refine that gradient, move it around, maybe here at the bottom, and we can make it bigger in this case. So let's just drag it out a bit. Something like that. Immediately feels more 3D, as if we sculpted in those two details. By the way, sculpting, if you ever work with clay, it really helps you to learn how to like mold shapes in your illustration. So you will get used to seeing these shades and highlights when you're working with clay or Play-Doh or anything like that. I used to play a lot with these when I was young. So it still feels like I'm using clay when I'm doing this. So I think about that, and that helps me to put the shades and the highlights and shadows in the right places. Now, of course, you can use things like the pencil tool if you feel like there's some edges that are too crude, like I don't like this detail here. So if you select the pencil tool and hold down the Alt or Option key, you can smooth out details very quickly, your lines. This is, by the way, the smooth tool, which you can access also separately. So if you right click on the pencil tool, there's the smooth tool as well. But if you use the pencil tool and you turn on Option key toggle smooth tool, then you can just get to it much faster, because I use the pencil tool quite often, so I don't actually switch to the smooth tool most of the time. Even if I just need the smooth tool, I would move to the pencil tool, but that's just my personal preference. Okay, so I just refined a little bit these shapes, and once we see the mouth, it will be easier to decide whether it works and whether we like it the way it looks. But we are starting to get to a quite good result already. Now let's do the shading underneath. Actually, before we get to the gradient mesh, which is a really cool feature and is definitely something that I want to make sure we cover properly. Before we get to that, let me just show you where I have my references and what type of references I use whenever I start an illustration. So we have our, let me just open this page here. We will come back to that page for the review of your designs. But first of all, let's talk a little bit about Pinterest. If you guys are not familiar with Pinterest, it's a brilliant site for collecting references from around the internet. The main reason I like it is because it has an amazing feed. Once you start following people, especially artists, you will see the things that they are pinning, and you can get that feed. So I'm following a lot of artists here, and what they always find as references for their work is usually brilliant for what I'm doing as well, especially if you select the artists that you like or their style, because then you will get already a tailored feed, which will really apply to what you are doing as well. So if you haven't already checked out Pinterest, make sure you do, and check out our page as well. So it's Pinterest / yes, I'm a designer. We have loads of boards, so these are all public, the ones that we are using, so you can find here all things like graphic design, character illustrations. I created a little board before I started this stream, just to get some inspiration and references, something really cool drawings and also puppets and all kinds of like renders as well here. So really an amazing place to find references. And while we are here in the browser, I just wanted to ask you, Emily, if you can just tell others a little bit about our Instagram.
Yeah, sure. So I started the Instagram around the same time that I joined the team here at Yes, and we mainly use it to collect visual references and also show off a little bit of the work we produce as part of the 365 project. We've got the cute little illustrations that Martin did of the team there, and generally it's just the kind of place that we want you to be able to come if you're feeling a little bit stuck or if you're looking for a bit of inspiration. We've recently started exploring a little bit more about how we can use the stories feature to help you guys learn. So really we want to think of these as little mini tutorials in themselves, or little mini kind of places you can get good tips on design. So here I've created this little one on typography, which posted up today, so it'd be great to hear what you guys think of that, and hopefully there'll be more of those soon. So yeah, check it out.
Yeah, it's really cool. We share usually different things on Instagram than on our other channels, so it's a different type of feed, so it's definitely worth signing up or following us on Instagram. And then I'll just let you show these other sites as well that we wanted to mention.
Yeah, absolutely. So another great way to kind of get more involved with the brand and learn more is through our Gumroad account. So I don't know if you guys know about our 365 project, but basically we are releasing a 1-minute tutorial every single day, and as part of that project we've actually gone and produced some design bundles. There's one a month, and they take a deeper look at each tutorial. We go a little bit more into the process, a little bit more into the tips and our inspirations. As well as that, Shumi also produces a design magazine for Yes every single month, which is great. Got loads of extra cool information about 365 in there, and also
all the downloadable files as well, like the PSDs, Illustrator files. You can get the exercise files as well.
Yeah, and also articles that she has written and also we've written about other inspiring artists or trends in the industry. So you can purchase them, you can purchase it month by month, and I recommend checking it out.
That, or if you follow us on Patreon, if you start supporting us on Patreon, you get these automatically at the second of each month.
Yep.
So either through Patreon or Gumroad you can get to this content, and these are all based on or relates to works together with our free series, the 365 Days of Creativity, which is obviously every day on our channel. You guys probably know about it. Hopefully it's not annoying you guys, the daily feed.
Hopefully you're enjoying it, you're not feeling bombarded by our videos.
Just a quick mention is the courses. We have all these links in the description, so if you want to check them out, you can sign up and check out our courses for free. There's an option as well for a free trial, 3-day free trial if you want to check out our courses. So these are all worth checking out. But so that's just a little bit of off topic, but let's move back into Illustrator and let's carry on working on the design. So we have probably another half an hour left of this live stream. So I will try to finish off get to as far as I can within that amount of time. And I can see there's still around 100 people watching, so that's great. It means it wasn't too boring so far, hopefully. So let me continue with that gradient mesh that I mentioned. So we need something on the belly to make it look like it's covered and there's no light or not much light getting there. That's probably the darkest detail on the body because that's the further away and most hidden away from the light source. So if I switch back to Photoshop, we can see here as well, I made that detail quite dark, and that's what makes it work and makes it look realistic. So what I'm going to do is to create a shape separately for that. So I'm going to use the pen tool and draw down here at the bottom the shape that we need. Now we can make this shape perfectly aligned if we wanted to, but I actually quite like it when it's not exactly aligned to the edge. It makes it more illustrative if it looks like this. You will see at the end, but we can always refine everything. It's the amazing thing about Illustrator that everything is non-destructive. So all the shapes you're drawing, you can refine at any point. Okay, so I am going to draw this shape. Let me just think. I can draw it actually quite big. Can draw it something like that for now. I can always refine this later. By the way, this can even be a duplicate of the original shape and then just apply the mesh on that. But sometimes I would just use a shape like this. So once we have the shape ready, we can make sure that we don't accidentally click on anything else by, and this is a very useful tip as well, double clicking on the object. So double click takes you into isolation mode. Now you won't accidentally click on anything else in the background. And what you need to do is you can set the color back to like a default fill color and remove the stroke color. In this case, we don't need that. But what you need is the mesh tool. The shortcut for that is U. And with that, all you have to do is to place a couple of points down here on this shape. So let's just start somewhere there. Let's add another point around here, another point around there, and then maybe let's just add another one here, and I think that will be enough, but maybe one more up here. I will just create one more there. Okay, so once you have your mesh ready, these individual anchor points created can be moved independently as well, so you don't have to rely on the way that the automatic shape creation work. You can actually move these around as you can see. So I can select multiple points as well, move them around and shape them and place them exactly where I want them to be. But the cool thing about the gradient mesh is that you can control these anchor points individually, so you can have different colors assigned to them, and then there will be a transition between them all. So what I'm going to do here is to now select the whole thing, and first of all I am going to set the opacity or blend mode of this to multiply, and that's why I had it originally in white, because once I set it to multiply, it's actually not going to show anything that is bright. It will only show details that are darker. So if I now double click outside, you will see that it's like invisible. But as soon as I select a point here, let's say just that one point there, and maybe these couple of points here, and select the color from maybe the eye, that darker color, and I click on that, why is it not applying it? It should apply it from there. Oh yes, because we are overlapping it. I think if I click here, yeah, there you go. Now it worked, but that color is a little bit too dark, so I'm just going to bring it up a bit, something like that. So see, what is happening is that that point is transitioning to all the neighboring anchor points, which are white, and white at the moment, because of the blend mode, is hidden away. That's why we are not seeing it. So if I select another point and just sample the same anchor point from here, or sample from there again from the eye, we get that result. Let me just save this anchor point as a swatch, and I'm going to bring up my swatches panel as well. So I'm going to save this as a swatch, so we can just get back to it quickly. So selecting that point as well, now you see that we have those 2 points and everything is blending to the neighboring colors. And just to show you, just to make sure you understand what is happening, if I pick a very different color here, you can see immediately what is happening. So all the different colors and different shades are trying to blend into each other. And because we used the blend mode for this whole object, I'm going to also set that back So the blend mode set back to normal. Now you can see how these colors are blending together. Again, I would set maybe a yellow color, and they are all nicely blending into each other. But since the blend mode is set to multiply, it will only show the darker details, and we won't see the brighter colors as much. So these two colors here maybe can be the same purple, but maybe in this case we can make it a little bit brighter. So let me just go back here, make it a bit brighter, maybe a bit more pinkish, something like that. And you see immediately we have a very nice transition from the body down that way. And of course we can again pick these points here, use our swatch that we saved, and then we start to have that nice transition once again. For these 2 points here, we can again pick that other color, which by the way I'm going to save as a swatch once more. So we have the brighter color, we can put that on these points here, and then we are starting to build up the effect.
Nice.
So these points, by the way, can be also, the actual shape itself can be amended. So if we feel like this should come all the way out or just a bit further out, we can always change them later. And what you can do, of course, is to move this mesh behind the leg. You don't want the leg to be in front, you want this to be behind. So I'm just going to drag it down quickly there. It's a bit too far. It has to be above the body, but behind the leg. So now it looks much better already. So once again, these points can be moved out a little bit further, and then it's closer to that detail. So the same thing, let's just do it, because we have already our mesh, we can just move a couple of mesh points here. Let's just select that mesh point. I am starting to mess it up. Let's just move it in here. And then select these two, darker detail. Maybe that one can be a little bit brighter. And then also these should be, there you go, double click with the selection tool for isolation, and then you're not getting in the way, or those details are not getting in the way. Okay, so we are building up our mesh. This is always the most fiddly work that you do. So you can see that it's coming together nicely. But I don't want to spend too much time on it because we don't have time to really refine this. I feel like this part here is got too dark because this is already out and it should be a bit brighter. So I'm going to select that point, select the color that we have on it, and I'm just going to make it a bit brighter. That point can be brighter, be even brighter than that. And then also we can make this one brighter. Maybe that one and that point as well. Actually just that point there. If we do that bright, why is it not showing it? I think it's this point that is still dark. Yeah. Okay, that's good. So it was just a bit too dark there. It didn't have to be so dark. And by the way, the whole mesh's opacity can be reduced. If you feel like you overdid it, overcooked it, just reduce the opacity and it gets much more subtle straight away. All right, so getting there. Apart from having the shadows, you always have to think of your highlights as well. So I'm just going to do a very quick highlight here. Just by using the ellipse tool, I can do a bit of reflection, the eye, and just simply copy that on the other side as well. See, immediately feels glossy, like as the eyes should be. So highlights and shading, highlights and shadows will always be creating the sense of three-dimensional forms. That's why it's very important to work with them. And to be honest, my mesh, I think, should have a little bit dark details around here as well. Just quickly adding those in will help to define. Now actually that's probably better if I just do it on that point, a darker detail. Yeah, just to separate the lag, that would need a little bit more refinement. I would want to define this edge here, making sure that this lag separates from the background. But maybe what we can do is to just select this, drag it out a bit and drag it up that way. So that way the lag is separating more from the body. So now we can see it a little bit better where the edge is. Okay, so let's move on. Were there any questions that we need to reply to?
I don't think so. I think
cool.
We're all good. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So let me show you another technique, something that I haven't used so far, an opacity mask. Now, masking is again something that we need to, you need to learn in Illustrator, both opacity and clipping masks, because with that you can achieve so much, and again, you can work in much more professional way. So what you need to do, and what I'm going to use it for here, is the cast shadow of these little details. Did anyone know the name of these details, by the way? Did anyone?
I think we had a couple of
guesses.
I think someone said spikes, which I think is a lot closer
to
a lot closer to what I had. As I was thinking, like someone else put scales.
That's good as well.
Someone's put pales, which might be a more technical term, or mics.
Okay.
I'm not sure. So
spike is quite good, I think.
I think spikes is the closest to what I would be able to associate them with.
Yeah, let's call them spikes.
I like that. Cool. Thanks, guys.
So with this shadow or cast shadow that I'm creating here, what I'm going to use is actually a gradient that is going into opacity. Now, this is not an opacity mask. It's more like a gradient that's using opacity, but I'm going to show you also how the opacity mask can be even more advanced than just using this technique. So both of them are in a way working like as an opacity mask, but this is probably the easier one. So the first one, all you need to do is to get a darker color, and then your brighter color you select and you reduce the opacity down to 0%. Now this darker color I'm going to make even darker, and that way, as you can see already when I click away, we created this faded effect, but by using the gradient tool we can decide how much transition we want to see in here. So something nice and blurred like that looks quite good in my, I think. Maybe let's just drag it out a bit more, something like that. Okay. The only problem is that you don't want this detail to show, so maybe what I'm going to change here is, okay, something like that. And then what I would normally also use on cast shadows is a bit of blur. So I would go up to the effect menu. By the way, if I move this out, you can see how it leads into opacity or transparency. And I think this is going to look better. I just refined it here. That's a bit harsh. I think this color should be darker as well, and it's going to work better. So the two sides of the gradient is the same. Now I can just refine my gradient a bit more. That looks better. Maybe a bit more stretched out. Okay, looking good. Now let's add an effect on it. So go to stylize. Sorry, not stylize. Just go to blur, Gaussian blur. And once you do that, this is the first instance of an actual pixel effect. So with this one, you just have to be careful. If you use pixel-based effects, they will have a resolution, and you just have to make sure the resolution is set to high enough if you want to get a good quality print from this design. So once I click OK, we will see that it's much softer. But if I zoom closer, after a while we might start seeing pixelation here. It doesn't really pixelate in my case, but if I go to the effect menu and choose document raster effect settings, there I can see it is because my resolution is set to 300 ppi. But if I set it to 72, it will be already pixelated, as you can see. Yeah. So just pay very extra care on that. And if your computer is slowing down whenever you use these type of effects, just work in 72 ppi, or even lower. You can say other. Sometimes I would set it up to, let's say, 30 ppi, and then it's obviously pixelated, so I won't forget to set it up at the end when I'm exporting the PDF or the EPS file from this. But it helps you to work more faster. I mean, the computer won't be struggling to work with these type of effects when the resolution is set to low.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah, and it's a global setting, so it won't be object-based. It will be applied on the whole document. So I'm just going to show you this quickly. If I duplicate this object, making it bigger, let's rotate it and put it somewhere like that. Now, if I go to Effect, Document Raster Effect Settings, if I switch back to 300 ppi and click OK, see both of them immediately updated. And because I duplicated that shape, it already has the blur on it and it already has the gradient, the way we set it up. But of course, everything is non-destructive in Illustrator, which means I can go there and individually refine my gradient, or even using the appearance panel, we can click on the Gaussian blur and change the amount. So if I feel like I need more blur on this, I can, or I can just leave it the same as is. Now I'm going to duplicate this one more time, rotate, align, that's it. Again, I'm thinking of the light source coming from here, that's why I'm rotating each of them. If I keep them the same direction, it will look weird. So you are thinking always of how these shapes relate to the light source. That's another shadow. And then the last one, to be honest, that one wouldn't cast a shadow here because it's already going in the distance. So we only need the shadows here. Is there a question?
Just quickly, so we have someone asking that the blur won't maintain the vector format that we tend to work in Illustrator.
Yes, so the way this works is that the effects that relies on pixels or rasters are going to still be vector objects, but the way they are calculated is by using pixels. So when I select these shadows, you will see the vector outline. So let me just switch back to my screen. So you can see when I select the object, it's still a vector detail, but it has a pixel render on top of it, an effect that renders that into pixels. So the cool thing is that if I zoom closer to this, let me just zoom a little bit closer. Cool thing is that I can always turn this effect on and off. So you can see it's still vectors. It is just a temporary state. We call it live effects. Anything that you apply and shows up in the appearance panel, because you can make changes to it. So it is still vector, but shown as pixels. So you just have to be aware of that fact. It's not a bad thing. So you shouldn't avoid using pixel effects at all. You just have to be aware of the fact how they work and make sure that you always increase the resolution at the end. Make sure you end up using 300 ppi or higher if you want, but you don't really need to go higher than that most of the times. Okay, so let's move on. I'm just going to reduce the intensity, the opacity of these two details around the eyes. I felt like they were a little bit too harsh, so that's blending a little bit better there. And now let me show you another cool trick. So if I feel like the leg, for example, in this case, should be blended into the object, I mean the body. First of all, I could of course always move these points around and just give it more space. But if I want to have like a neat transition here, what I can use also is an opacity mask. So this is the other complex technique, or not that complex, but it's a bit more advanced technique. So all you do is you create a rectangle, okay, from the direction where usually the transition needs to be, and then choose a black and white gradient. Set the gradient direction up in any direction just to have something in there, and then select that and the shape, so the rectangle and the shape, and then go into the transparency panel and choose Make Mask. So there is a button there. Once you click on that, then also make sure you click on Clip. You don't want the clip to be on, so turn clip off, and then click on the opacity mask thumbnail, with which you can start changing the opacity mask. And most importantly, in this case, I want to reverse this gradient. So the way it works is that anything that's black is going to be hidden, anything that's white is going to be visible. So in this case, it needs to be just a very subtle transition from visible to non-visible or hidden details. So if I zoom closer, you will see what this opacity mask can do to transition from visible to hidden. And I can even, of course, it doesn't have to be a rectangle, I can even shape it in the direction I need it, so something like that. And of course the gradient itself can be adjusted in the direction I want. So I want to see this detail and hide it within that rectangle, within that shape that I created, something like that. Now it's a little bit messy because we have this edge here, but this could help to transition from visible to hidden details. But I don't think it's necessary in this case, so I can just release the clipping, the opacity mask. I just wanted to mention this technique. It can be used for more complex illustration. In this case, I feel like it's actually working quite nicely the way it is already. So there's so many different ways you can get to the same thing, either just aligning the gradient, using a gradient mesh, or using an opacity mask, or even a combination of all of those together. Okay, now let's do the mouth quickly, because that's probably the last detail that we will have time for. So the mouth, we will see if I press Command Y, and then let's draw this quickly in. So I'm just going to use the pen tool and draw. The mouth is probably the most scariest detail in here. I'm going to draw first the shade, something like that. And
the teeth are probably my favorite part of this illustration.
Yeah, it is fun. So let me just draw all along there. Okay, then switch back to normal. Now I made a mistake here. Let's just refine that point. Holding down the Alt key, you can refine anchor points. And then what I'm going to do is to use this color that we have on the eye. And then, like before, I can select the two shapes and using the shape builder tool, holding down the Alt or Option key, trim off the detail that we don't need. Now I'm going to duplicate the eye, place it somewhere around here, move it all the way on the top, pick the same detail as behind, so the actual body, something like that, and then also put another one here behind the object, and already we will start to have the mouth. Now in this case it would be a closed shape for the mouth, but expression is always very important. To get like an emotional response to a character, you need an interesting expression. So that's what we are going to do now. You see, it's just a very tiny open mouth, but it still adds so much expression to it, and it makes the monster look a bit freaky, but also cute at the same time. It really can change a lot by adding the most important facial features like mouth, eyes, and nose. And by playing with these, you can achieve a lot. So let me draw that shape here for the mouth. So I'm just going to draw this quickly in. Draw around it. Again, I'm not paying attention to the top detail. Go back, select these two shapes, use the shape builder, cut off what we don't need, and we already start to have what we wanted to create here. Now for this shape, I'm going to use a dark red color, even darker than that. And now I'm going to show you a really cool technique. I love this feature. It's called Draw Inside. It's like using a clipping mask. It actually creates a clipping mask. All you have to do is to press Shift D twice until you see a little corner point showing up around the object. So that means you are drawing inside that shape. And if I now start drawing anything like a circle, it's going to be within that shape that we already created. So this contains whatever I'm drawing from this point on, and that's great because we can use this for creating the tongue of the monster. So we can move this into place. You can see already even a simple placement like this can make such a big difference in how the character looks like, just simply by moving that around. And I'm not going to spend too much time. I'll just place it something in like that. And then let's draw the teeth. So for the teeth, I'm just going to use the ellipse tool, pick up the same detail from the eyes, and then put it somewhere there. Now I could rely on my original drawing if I wanted to, but I don't feel like it's really necessary. I can draw teeth quite quickly. Again, use the gradient tool in this case to get the brightest details where it's least hidden. So that's where more light would hit that object. And then if I just select that object, within the clipping group, sometimes it's easier to select through the layers panel. I can duplicate and duplicate, and then have one which is longer. That's again like a term that I don't know in English. this tooth, which is the sharpest one. Biology term. The one you usually.
Carnivorous. That's what
Yes.
makes us a carnivore.
Yeah, yeah.
Tooth, but I'm unsure on the.
So that's the tooth that you use to like bite off things, or monsters would use it.
Things.
Yes.
Yep.
So we have that tooth in place, and then let's just pick one of these again, move this behind, and maybe have one more here in the background, send it to the back. So we have the teeth ready. Now I'm just going to select these all, shift click here in the layers panel, press O. Fangs, yes.
Sorry.
Click in the middle, and then this is the reflect tool. So I selected all of them, press O on the keyboard, click in the middle, and then start dragging these details to create a symmetrical version of them. Hold down Alt and Shift, or in this case just Alt is enough, and then Alt or Option key is going to duplicate them, and then we just have to refine their position. This one here, if I use the direct selection tool, I can just move up a little bit, something like that. Now let's zoom out, and that looks okay. The only problem is I would make all of these details a little bit darker. So let me just select all the teeth, and with the recolor artwork here on the top, the little color wheel, we can get to all of the colors that we used in there. Let's just save in case the document crashes, because I'm starting to test the computer, especially because we are doing the live stream as well. But yeah, so if I have these details selected, I think the live recolor artwork is showing up somewhere outside of my screen, so let's not worry about that. I think it looks fine. I would just make it slightly darker, but for now I think it will work. Maybe what we can do is to have that detail, the background detail, which is our clipping mask, just make that slightly more dark, something like that, so the mouth pops a little bit even more. All right, so that's roughly all that we had time for, but before we finish, I would like to just summarize very quickly the process that we went through. So we created the original drawing in Photoshop, and that's what we used as reference, but it could have been any other references as well, of course, a simple sketch on paper that you scan in, whatever you produce in any applications you want, or even a photo reference, and you set that as a template layer, and then you work on top of that, and then once you are ready, you can of course turn that off. I'm missing still the claws and the shadow underneath, but I think it will just repeat the techniques that we already covered. I have here the final result, which has a little bit more effects. Obviously, I probably took a little bit more here, and I wasn't roughly the same amount of time it took to create this version, but obviously I didn't have to talk, so it was easier to refine it. But you see, we actually got very close to that, and to be honest, I actually like the colors here a bit more. So we will send you, or we will include in the description, once the recording is ready and this video will be on our channel, you will be able to download both this version and the other version, just so you have multiple references. But before you go, I would like to make sure you just stay for the last bit, because it's a very useful way of learning. So not just learning from someone who is a professional and doing this and can explain everything. There is a reason why I'm doing everything, but it's also very interesting to see how others, more beginner illustrators, work, and see what you can learn from their mistakes and also from their unique techniques that might work really well. So we've done this little brief for you guys, whoever had the time submitted their work, and we have it here on our Google Plus page. And we've got, I don't know, around 15 to 20 submissions, so it's brilliant. And we are going to give away awards for, prizes for the winners. We picked 3 winning designs here. So, yeah.
I was just going to say, we've got a few questions
cool.
that have kind of accumulated over
the sure.
past. I think there was one a little bit a while back, just to ask, could we use the feather effect rather than the raster effect?
Yeah, the feather effect is good as well, but as far as I know, that's also going to create pixels just like the blur. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't, then it could be actually better. But again, there's no disadvantage of using the blur as long as you have a higher resolution. So, but yes, feather is a good point as well. Yeah.
Cool. And then Deb's asking, would it be easier to use today for the illustration that we've done? Would it be better to use the cursor or a pen?
You mean the mouse or the tablet? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, I think that's the question. Yeah.
So I was using the mouse, but I have a tablet next to me as well. I feel like in Illustrator I am more efficient working with the mouse because I can be more precise selecting anchor points. If I do more freehand drawing, like in Photoshop, then I would use more the tablet. But even in Illustrator, sometimes if I draw freehand lines with the pencil tool or the brush tool, for those type of things, I would switch to the tablet.
Yeah, brilliant.
So, yeah.
Cool. And then just one quick last one. What will prevent the draw inside mode from working in Illustrator?
So the draw inside mode is here on the left side, cool. And you can turn it off by pressing Shift D. So Shift D is the way you can switch between the modes. But if I just turn off the camera for a second, I can show it here in Illustrator. So it's here on the left corner. These are the 3 modes. So just make sure you are in draw normal. That's the way you can work without working in the draw inside.
Cool.
Okay, so is that all the questions?
Yeah, that's all good, brilliant.
Yeah, all right, brilliant. So moving back to the entries we got from you guys. First of all, we had great fun going through them, especially the ones where we had some stories as well behind them. Yeah. So some of you wrote a story like this one here. This is inspired after Stacy's crazy pop and the silly stories our family makes about him. I'm not going to go through all of them. There's a few that we discussed and we thought that is definitely worth having a look for you guys, and to talk through it just very briefly before we finish off today's session. So the one that we picked as the winning design, first of all, shall we start with the third one? And work our way up to the winning? Okay, let's start third, yeah. So the third one was, I think it was that one, or...
no, just this one here, yes. The pink one.
So David Reinhardt's design we picked as the third. He included the original sketch as well. And then we have the final vector artwork here. The reason why we like this is because it has a fairly good grasp of the lighting. So we have lighting coming from the right side, and it's that style as well where we have one side in light, the other side in shade. So that was quite well, although in this situation the drop shadow wouldn't be behind, it would be more to the left. Yeah. But I mean, it doesn't have to be photorealistic. We really like the concept and the style and the execution. My only concern is there is a couple of thin lines that I don't think is necessary, especially around here on the candy. Yeah. I think it's just that black line is too overpowering, especially because David used these nice subtle purple outlines, and they're soft and blend much better with the object. So I think it would improve a lot if these lines were refined a bit more. But in general, I think it's a very cool design. So well done for David, and we will be sending David the prize. Mm-hmm. So let's move on to the second one that we picked.
Which was this one?
That one there. I'm just going to quickly check if there's any new ones, but these are the ones we've seen. Mm-hmm. So the second one is Quentin. We really like this illustration as well. Unfortunately, Quentin didn't share his email address, so we're not sure whether we will be able to give out the prize. But still, we wanted to mention that this is a really nice work as well. Mm-hmm. My only point that I would make here is that the posture is good, but it could improve a bit, especially the legs. I'm not sure which leg is in front and which leg is in behind, so a little bit of indication of that would have been helpful. Like here we can see this arm is behind the body, that arm is more like in front of it, so that's much more working better, and there's a little shading under the neck or under the chin, so that again works better. Around the legs it's a bit flat,
ambiguous, isn't it? Yeah, you're not too sure.
Exactly, not sure what's in front and behind. So
I like the fact that it's contained in a lighter purple container. I think like if this monster was just placed on such a dark background, it would struggle to stand out. So I like the fact that he's used a container to contain the monster in. But yeah, I completely agree about the legs as well.
Yeah, so very nice illustration. And then our favorite one is there's some really funny ones. Yeah, that one there.
Brilliant ones.
There's some that was really scary, like this one, the chopping octopus. Emily is still terrified.
Yeah.
But Irina's design we love. This is such a nice illustration, and Irina actually shared the process as well, or the details from the monster to all the environment and the little details that are coming out. So in general, even like the composition in this bubble or water tank is working really nice as a container. So we definitely think this is probably the most professional and exciting.
Absolutely, and the colour palette is beautiful as well, and just I particularly love the little jellyfish kind of swimming around, just the attention to detail, all of it. Yeah, it's a great piece of work.
I love the way these coral or plant details are on the monster's head, and it forms the hair, and even like it has that detail which makes it look, the fringe, even more like hair. So there's so many subtle little details here that works really well. Plus the expression, even though it's very simple, it's just 3 lines, but still gives that like
serenity,
calm and meditating, peaceful expression. So once again, I think overall it works really well. And then there's some really cool other illustrations as well here. We won't have time to go through all of them, but check out the Google Plus page if you want to look at them more closely. We will keep it in the description, so if you missed this little competition, don't worry, you can still submit your work. We will keep this page open, so whenever you watch this live stream, you will be able to still post your work here, and we will try to respond just in the comments. And also feel free to comment on each other's work. We can learn a lot from each other as well. So the whole point of these live streams, and that's something that I want to like really pay attention to in the future as well, that it's great that I explain things to you guys, but it's very important to have like a two-way interaction. We want you to design with us. That's why we call this new series that. So we will always give you briefs before the live stream. We will try to give you enough time to submit your work, or if you haven't had time to do so and you watch the recording of the live stream, you still will be able to submit your work, and we will try to respond to as many of these designs as we can. So that's all for today. It was a little bit more than an hour and a half. In the future, we will try to keep it to around the same time, maybe sometimes a bit shorter, but around the same time. So let us know in the chat if you have any suggestions, or if anything that you prefer to include in the future live streams. And also thank you so much, guys, for joining us today. And in the future we will be trying to do more of these live streams. I don't have a schedule yet, but we will decide that on later, and then we will be announcing it always on time
in advance. Cool.
So thank you so much for everyone joining, and see you guys in the next one.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.